Shalom. I'd like to begin this week's Parsha with an understanding of a statement in the Mishnah, Pirkay Avot, in the 5th chapter, which reads as follows. Kol machloket l'shem shamayim. Any disagreement or conversation or argument that has its basis in arguing for the sake of truth, arguing for the sake of heaven, literally as it's translated, sofa mekayem, that it will ultimately endure. Any argument that is not for the sake of heaven, is not for the sake of pursuing truth, will not endure. And then the Mishnah goes on to give two examples of both. The first example is that of Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai were two fabulously erudite scholars that lived in the first century, and they argued for the sake of heaven. They had schools of thought that argued to try to find out what it is that God really wants of us that will make us whole and act in consonance with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And their arguments are preserved in the Talmud forever. We continue to study their arguments even more than 2,000 years later and gain insight from them. On the other side, what is an argument that is not for the sake of heaven? Well, that's the argument that Korach engaged in with Moses. Korach was a man who actually was a cousin of Moses, and the Parsha this week is called Korach, named after him. For in this week's Torah portion, Korach, again the cousin of Moses, asks, why you and why not me? Why is it that you get to lead the people of Israel through the desert, traipsing through, giving orders to turn right, to turn left, to follow the mandates of God? Why not me? Why not somebody else? Why do you take all of the credit and all of the power upon yourself? And this argument ultimately devolves into one that fractures the Jewish people, ends in the death of the individuals that are taking sides against Moshe Rabbeinu, and ends as in a debacle. Now here's the problem that I have with this segment of Mishnah of Pirkay Avot. We know about the story of Hillel and Shammai, the many arguments that take place between them. We know the fact that they had a friendship that endured despite their argumentation. And we know about the story of Korach and Moses. Their story endures too, despite the fact that their contention ends in a terrible mess. Yet, both stories do endure. We know both stories very well. We just recited them now. So, looking at that passage from Pirkay Avot again, it says, any argument for the sake of heaven will not endure, and any argument for the sake of heaven will endure, and yet do not the fact that we're able to recite both of these stories, argue against this, because we know both, and then both arguments have endured. And I think the truth lies a little bit closer to, what do you take away from these two stories? We live in a time that is fractured. We're arguing across tables where people sit to normally break bread. We argue with people that are in the street. We argue about virtually everything under the sun. Who's right and who's left? Who is right and who is wrong? Right? What are the decisions being made on the international scene that cause us to be unsettled or feel like there's great power and great wisdom being exercised? What ultimately is going to be the decider of what argument will last and what argument will not last? Well, again, going back to Korach and Moses and Hillel and Shammai, these arguments all do endure. We remember all the bad things that have happened. We remember them, unfortunately, with far too much clarity. So what is the takeaway from all of this? The takeaway is, who are you? What are we arguing for? What is the basis of our argument? What are we struggling to try to find? It's not so much about the things that we remember. It's about the things that we take inside of ourselves, inside of our soul, and allow them to steer our course through the rest of our days. There are right and there are wrong choices about everything. And every decision that we ever make, we should ask ourselves, am I right or am I wrong? Am I acting on impulse? Am I acting just to curry favor with people who I surround myself with? Am I right with everything that I'm saying? Or am I only partially right? Am I wrong? And am I willing to accept the wrongness of what I'm saying? Here's a wonderful story that came to me from one of my colleagues about a man who never gave charity, who never did anything kind in his life. He just aggregated wealth to himself and tried to feel like everything belonged to him, kind of like Korach. He dies and he goes to this beautiful place where there are beautiful people and lots of food, and where he's able to enjoy himself basking in the sunlight of an afterlife. He said, if I knew it was like this, I would have even gotten more stuff for myself. He asked for food. Food is brought to him. He asked the next day, he asked for a pen and paper to write things down. Bring him a pen and a paper. The next day he asked for some woodworking tools. It's brought to him. He's looking for things to do and finds that he is so bored in this place. He says, I'm so unhappy. Everything that I have is given to me on a silver platter. I thought this was heaven. I don't feel like anything has meaning here because I don't have to struggle for everything. And the woman who's listening to him complain about the portals of heaven said, well, you're making a mistake. This is not heaven. This is the other place. Life is made for challenges. Life is made for challenges, and those challenges are almost always levied upon ourselves, not the other. It's not about accusing. It's not about pointing fingers. Are you right? Am I wrong? Are you wrong? Am I right? It's mostly about you and me. It's about the decisions that we make that steer our course in life. So going back to that very first phrase that we cited at the beginning of this video, what are the arguments that last? And what are the arguments that do not last? The arguments that last, everything is going to be recorded. Everything is going to be remembered. But the things that are of ultimate consequence are the choices that we make that steer our life. What choices are we making? And how adept are we to say, this is what I think, but I might be wrong.